She saw him, and something stirred. Low, deep, immediate. Not a thought, a pulse. The kind of awareness that lives below logic, the kind she hadn't felt in a long time, or maybe never with this much clarity. Her body noticed before her mind did the shape of his stillness, the weight of his presence, the calm in his eyes that didn't demand anything, and somehow made her want everything. But she didn't move. Not because she was afraid. Not because she was playing games. And definitely not because she didn't want him. She didn't move because desire's not a command. And for a woman who had spent years becoming whole, the last thing she would do is trade her self-possession for a spark, no matter how strong. She wanted him. Yes. But want was never her master. It was just a signal, one she could feel fully without following blindly. A Stoic woman doesn't deny her desire. She studies it. She holds it. She lets it burn without spilling. Because for her, power isn't in suppression. It's in embodied restraint. The kind that doesn't push love away, but never chases it just because it stirs something in her blood. She wanted him, but she didn't chase, and that made all the difference. Chapter 1. Her want was immediate. Her response was not. She felt it, instantly. Not a thought, not a fantasy. Just that subtle internal shift, the one no one sees, but she knows too well. Her breath changed, her chest tightened, slightly. Her gaze steadied. Her body whispered, "That one." It would have been easy to move. To smile. To play the game she used to win. But she didn't. Because now, she doesn't move from impulse. She moves from alignment. She used to respond fast. Too fast. Because want felt rare, and when it came, she clung. To it, like a signal that something important might begin. But all that speed ever gave her was regret. Pieces of herself left behind in moments she chased too soon. Now she waits. Not because the feeling isn't real, but because she is. A Stoic woman doesn't fear desire, but she refuses to obey it blindly. She holds space for what rises, and lets it speak, before deciding if it's telling the truth. Because she knows, not everything that calls her body can hold her heart. And not every man who moves her has the depth to stand beside her once the fire settles. So she stayed still, and let the wanting be felt without needing to be fed. She doesn't need him to notice her. She needs herself to remain. That's the new standard. Feel everything. Lose nothing. Chapter 2. She observed him. Not to judge, not to control, but to understand what her body had responded to. She didn't look away. But she didn't lean in either. She stayed still and let her attention shift from sensation to observation. Her desire had spoken. Clearly, suddenly. But now it was her mind's turn to catch up. She wanted him. Yes. But she had wanted before, and she had paid for not pausing. So this time she asked, What exactly did I feel? Was it presence or projection? Was it his calm, or my craving for it? She studied him quietly, not like a strategist, more like someone searching for the source of a sound she wasn't sure was coming from outside or from inside her own longing. Was it his posture? His pace? The way he didn't try to be seen? She noticed things most would miss. The way his eyes didn't scan the room. The way his shoulders didn't apologize for existing. The way he didn't reach for his phone to fill the moment. He was still. Not performatively so, but naturally. Comfortably. And in that stillness, she recognized something familiar. Not in him, in herself. A part of her had been waiting to meet someone who didn't require her to soften just to be safe. She could feel that part leaning forward, but she didn't let it take the lead. Not yet. The Stoics taught, first see things as they are, then choose your response. And she had learned. Desire doesn't mean readiness, and attraction doesn't mean access. So she stayed in observation, not to evaluate his worth, but to understand her own pattern. Because she knew many women fall, not from being fooled, but from not waiting long enough to see what's real. She watched. She waited. Not for him to act, but for herself to be certain that the feeling she had was not just strong, but wise. Chapter 3. She asked herself, do I want him? Or do I want what he represents? It would be easy to say, I want him. To let her body speak louder than her discernment. To follow the spark before it settled into something she could actually understand. But she's been here before. Felt this fire. Rushed into rooms lit by her own longing, only to find that what she was chasing wasn't a person, but a projection. So this time she sat with the question longer. Not just, do I want him? But, what part of me feels awakened in his presence? What is it exactly that I'm reaching for? She traced it. Not the attraction, but the meaning her mind had started weaving around it. Was it the way he stood like he didn't need anything? Was it the quiet in him that mirrored the quiet she had fought so hard to build? Was it admiration? Curiosity? Or loneliness wearing perfume? She wasn't judging herself. She was just refusing to mistake movement in her body for truth in her path. The Stoics believed that unchecked desire is not dangerous because it's wild, but because it's deceptive. It convinces you that you are pursuing something external when you are actually running from something internal. And she knew, if she didn't ask these questions now, she'd answer them later, with disappointment. She had wanted before, deeply, instantly, desperately. And she had learned the hard way, that wanting is not the same as knowing. So she asked herself, do I want this man, or do I want to feel something new? Do I see him, or do I see an answer to a hunger I haven't fully named? Because even desire, when not examined, can become a mask for longing that has nothing to do with love. So she paused, not to kill the spark, but to clarify it. Because When a woman like her moves, it's not to chase, it's to choose. And before she chose anything, she had to make sure it wasn't just her emptiness, disguised as attraction. Chapter 4. She didn't move toward him, but her stillness made it impossible not to feel her. She stayed where she was, but her presence moved through the space like a current. Not loud, not forceful, just clear. He hadn't even noticed her at first, but now he couldn't not notice. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't leaning in. She wasn't performing receptivity, and yet something about her felt undeniably open, in a way that didn't beg to be, entered, but dared you to be still enough to meet it without breaking it. She wasn't trying to be magnetic, she simply was. Because true magnetism doesn't come from effort. It comes from self-possession. And she had that. The kind that makes a man wonder if approaching would be a risk. Not because she's dangerous, but because she's real. She let the tension sit, unresolved, unspoken. Because she knew, a woman who stays in her body while desire is rising radiates something stronger than seduction. Certainty. Certainty not about him, but about herself. The Stoics spoke of temperance, the ability to remain unmoved even in the presence of something that moves you. And that's exactly what she practiced. Not as a tactic, not as a wall, but as a form of quiet power. That said, if you're going to step toward me, do so with intention, or don't step at all. She didn't flirt. She didn't avert her gaze. She simply stayed in full contact with her own center, while allowing him to feel the impact of being seen by someone who doesn't need to be seen back. And that was the moment he felt her. Not through touch, not through words, but through the weight of her silence. That didn't chase and didn't run, but changed the entire room just by remaining. Chapter 5. He was drawn to her body, but it was her nervous system that made him stay. At first, it was instinct, visual, cellular, the kind of pull that needs no name, only permission. But something unexpected happened. He didn't act. He hesitated, not out of doubt, but out of something rare, awareness. Because the more he noticed her, the less he wanted to move fast. She wasn't just attractive. She was regulated, and his body could feel it before his mind understood it. She wasn't fidgeting, wasn't scanning the room, wasn't molding herself to be more approachable. She was anchored. And what hit him wasn't just desire, it was contrast. His system, once so used to chasing signals, was suddenly face to face with stillness that didn't ask to be touched, to be felt. In psychology, this is called nervous system attunement. When one body recognizes the steadiness of another and begins to reorganize itself to match. He didn't know the term, but he felt the shift. His breath slowed. His thoughts sharpened. His need to prove quietly deflated. Because her presence wasn't performative. It was earned. And the price she'd paid to be this calm, he could sense it wasn't cheap. He'd met women who lit him up, who played the rhythm of flirtation perfectly. But this was different. She wasn't giving him anything. And somehow, He felt safer with her than with any woman who had ever offered more. He didn't know yet if he could hold her attention, but he knew this. If he was going to move toward her, it had to be with the same quiet she carried. Or not at all. Because she was no longer the object of desire. She had become the mirror of it. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to meet. Chapter 6. He didn't want to rush toward her anymore. He just wanted to learn how to stay without disturbing her stillness. He could have made a move. He'd done it before. Easy charm, practiced timing, light banter. But none of that felt right. Here. Not because she rejected it, but because she didn't invite it. Her silence didn't challenge him. It restructured him. Subtly, slowly, like being near someone who had already passed through their own fire and didn't need anyone to relight it. She didn't need to be entertained. She didn't offer clues. She didn't soften to make him feel more comfortable. And strangely, that didn't scare him. It calmed him. Because her neutrality wasn't emptiness. It was emotional regulation. And next to her, he started to feel just how dysregulated he'd been. In psychology, this is called co-regulation. When one person's nervous system naturally influences another's toward stability or chaos. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to control hers. He was being shaped by it. He didn't want to rush anymore. Not because he was afraid, but because he respected the peace she had worked too hard to earn. He realized that most of his past attraction was built on disturbance, on heat without depth, speed without substance. Reactions mistaken for connection. But with her, everything felt slower, and heavier, and more honest. There was nothing to win, only something to witness. He didn't need her to affirm him. He needed to learn how to breathe near her without making her tighten. He needed to feel his own center before he tried to meet hers, and that shift from pursuit to presence was the first time he saw himself, not as the chaser, but as the one still learning how to walk quietly in a room full of energy he didn't need to conquer. Chapter 7. He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he didn't want to run. He didn't feel small around her. He felt seen. Not for what he did, not for what he said, but for what he carried quietly and hadn't yet faced. And that was terrifying. Not because she exposed it, but because she never tried to fix it. She just stood there, present, unbothered. Rooted in herself in a way that didn't demand explanation, but revealed where he was still ungrounded. He'd always been the one who held. The frame, who stayed calm while others reached. But with her, the power balance was invisible. And that's what made it real. She wasn't dominating. She just wasn't shrinking. And that absence of accommodation forced him to meet a version of himself that didn't know what to do without validation. In psychology, this is called attachment activation, when being near someone secure unintentionally triggers your unresolved craving to be seen, chosen, affirmed. And for him, this was a moment of decision. Would he act from the place that felt urgent? Or from the place that was becoming aware? She didn't test him, but her clarity exposed every place where he still mistook attraction for entitlement. She wasn't pushing him away. She just wasn't pulling him in, and that unsettled every blueprint had built around closeness. Because what he was feeling wasn't rejection. It was freedom without invitation, and for a man conditioned to chase, that was disorienting. But he didn't run. Not this time. He stayed. Not to prove he was strong, but to practice the strength of not being needed and choosing to remain kind, respectful, and whole. He wanted her, but he wanted her from a place that didn't need her to be anything other than what she already was. That, for him, was new, and quietly transformational. Chapter 8. He didn't want to be close if it meant she had to leave herself to let him in. He felt it rising, that quiet longing to step closer, to say something, to test the water. But the closer he imagined getting, the more he noticed what he didn't want to disturb. It wasn't fear. It was reverence. Because the way she stood, not closed, but complete, made him realize that his presence was either going to protect what she'd built, or unsettle it. And he didn't want to be the reason she had to tighten, perform, or retreat from the place she had spent years reclaiming. In trauma-informed psychology, this is called relational safety. When someone feels they can stay fully present in their body, their truth, their silence, even when someone else enters the space. He didn't want to be let in if the price of admission was her contorting herself to make him comfortable. He didn't want closeness if it meant she had to abandon the very stillness that drew him in the first place. So he paused, not out of hesitation, but out of respect, because her energy wasn't inviting touch. It was inviting discernment. And this time, he wasn't mistaking neutrality for disinterest. He saw it clearly. She wasn't waiting. She was watching. To see if he could approach without reaching. Be near without consuming. He didn't ask to sit closer. He adjusted his breathing. He didn't ask for a signal. He watched for her rhythm. He didn't ask, "Can I have you?" He asked himself, "Can she remain herself with me here?" Because if the answer was no, then it wasn't time. And maybe it never would be. But he was okay with that, because he finally understood. The deepest form of intimacy is not closeness. It's presence that doesn't cost the other their peace. Chapter 9. She felt something shift, not because he came closer, but because she was still herself with him there. She didn't expect it. The warmth, the soft release in her chest, the way her body didn't signal, "Guard up." He hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken anything heavy, hadn't even tried to hold her gaze too long. But she felt it. That rare sensation of being near a man and not shrinking. She was still breathing in her rhythm, still grounded in her spine, still fully within her own skin. And somehow, he was still there, without making her abandon any of that. It wasn't chemistry. She'd felt chemistry before. It burns fast. It often demands repayment, and it rarely leaves anything intact. But this was different. It was resonance. And more than that, it was safety. In somatic psychology, this is called felt safety. When the body, not just the mind, decides it doesn't need to protect itself in the presence of another. She hadn't felt that in years, even with men who were kind, even with men who meant well, because their presence, however gentle, still carried expectation. But he didn't carry that. He carried stillness. And stillness for her was louder than compliments. She noticed her body relaxing, not dissolving, but settling. Not leaning in, but no longer pulling away. And in that moment she realized, desire without urgency is sacred. And a man who doesn't require her to perform softness makes her feel softer than anyone who's ever tried to earn it. She didn't move toward him, but she also didn't need distance. And that was a kind of intimacy she had forgotten was possible. To feel something and still remain whole. Chapter 10. They were still two selves. But for a moment, neither felt alone. They weren't speaking. They weren't touching. They weren't moving. But the space between them felt warm. Full. Not with tension, but with quiet permission. Permission to be. Not to prove, not to impress, not to perform closeness or hide behind independence. Just to be. He wasn't trying to decode her anymore, and she wasn't monitoring his gaze for signs of pressure or withdrawal. They had stopped trying to read each other as puzzles and started holding each other's presence. And that shift from analysis to allowance was where something true began. In psychological language, this is called secure presence, when two people can share emotional and physical space without demanding change, performance, or clarity. There was no story being written, no future being planned, no roles being played. Just the rare kind of stillness that doesn't beg to become something else, because it already is enough in its current form. She wasn't wondering what he wanted, and he wasn't measuring her availability. They were just present, fully, simultaneously. Without tension pulling them forward, and without fear pulling them back. And in that mutual neutrality, something quiet bloomed. Peace. Not the peace of withdrawal, but the peace of presence that doesn't threaten your sense of self. She didn't need to be claimed, and he didn't need to claim her. And yet, they were both there. Rooted, alive, changed. Not because they came closer, but because neither one had to leave themselves to meet the other. Chapter 11. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was the first time. Neither of them had to leave themselves to stay. They weren't calling it anything. Not love, not potential, not even connection, but what was happening. It didn't need a name to be real, because naming it might have shrunk it into something familiar. And this felt like something they hadn't ruined yet, with expectation. She didn't try to picture their future, and he didn't ask what she wanted from him. Because neither of them was trying to escape the present by rushing into certainty. For once, being right here, right now, was enough. In emotional development work, this is called presence-based relating, where you meet someone not through story, but through moment-by-moment truth. Not what it could become, not what it should become, but what it is when no one's performing safety to earn closeness. She felt her nervous system stay soft. No spikes, no bracing, no silent recalculations to stay likable. And he felt his chest stay open. No need to lead, no impulse to prove. They were just with, not in something, not building something, just with one another without cost. It was subtle, but powerful. The realization that when no one is chasing, no one is running. And when no one is running, what's left is real. Not urgent, not dramatic. Just safe enough to stay. Chapter 12. Nothing was taken from her, and that's why she didn't feel the need to run. She had waited to feel that familiar shift. The moment where her body tightens, her shoulders brace, her inner space folds inward to make room for someone else's need. But it didn't come. Not with him. He hadn't taken anything. Not her rhythm. Not her silence. Not her attention through manipulation. Not her softness through pressure. And because of that, she stayed. Not because she was caught, but because, for once, she wasn't being drained by simply being witnessed. She had known attraction before. The kind that starts sweet and ends with her trying to rebuild her intuition, brick by brick. But this was new. Nothing had been extracted, and because of that, something unexpected began to grow. Choice. In boundary psychology, they call this mutual sovereignty when two people share space without collapsing into each other, or erasing themselves to stay connected. She didn't feel small beside him. She didn't feel exaggerated either. She felt accurate. Present, alive. Without having to explain why. Her energy didn't match someone else's expectations. He never asked her to hurry. Never asked her to soften. Never asked her to shrink. And somehow, that made her want to soften. Not to please, but because there was finally space to let softness emerge without being stolen. She didn't owe him closeness, but in her own quiet way, she began to lean in. Not physically, not romantically, but energetically. She stopped resisting the possibility that some men don't take. Some men just remain. And when someone remains, without threatening what you've built, something inside you whispers. Maybe this time, you don't have to leave to stay whole. Chapter 13. There was no promise, but something in both of them had quietly shifted forever. They didn't exchange numbers. They didn't ask, "Will I see you again?" They didn't pretend this was more than it was. But they both felt it. The subtle pull in their chest as they turned away. Not grief, not longing, not regret. Just a soft dish for something rare that had left them untouched, and yet forever changed. Neither had touched the other, and yet both had been reached. Not through words, not through action, but through the absence of demand. The presence of clarity, and a The quiet recognition that this, whatever it was, had weight. In developmental psychology, they call this a corrective emotional experience. When something safe, simple, and real replaces a pattern that was once painful and confusing. They had broken no boundaries. But they had broken a cycle. One that says desire must always chase, and being wanted means being claimed. She didn't feel unfinished. She felt whole, and he didn't feel rejected. He felt calm. No chase, no conquest, no story. Just two people who saw each other and didn't need to take. He didn't try to hold her. She didn't ask him to stay, but both knew this wasn't forgettable. It wouldn't show up in a relationship status. It wouldn't become a headline in their lives, but it would live in how they moved from here, how they paused differently, listened more honestly, reached less blindly, because of one moment where no one tried to win, no one tried to disappear, and both of them left with everything still intact. She never reached for him, and yet he felt her. Every moment, every breath. Not because she pursued, but because she stayed present without offering herself as proof. She didn't try to be unforgettable. But some things stay not because they're loud, but because they're undisturbed. He wanted her, and she wanted him. But neither tried to turn that into ownership. And somehow, that made it more sacred than any connection she'd ever chased, and any intimacy he'd ever earned. She left with herself. He left with clarity. And in a world that teaches us to prove we care by losing ourselves, they had done something radical. They cared and remained whole. No love story, no heartbreak, no fire. Just a stillness that changed them both. She didn't chase, and that's why he never forgot her. This is Stoic Spyder, where presence is not performance, and where stillness is the message. If this stayed with you, stay with us. Subscribe. But only if you're ready to feel more, by saying less.